Thank you, Speaker. My question's for the Premier. In 2 weeks, the world's largest weapons manufacturers will gather in Melbourne for the Land Forces Expo to showcase their products to trade delegates from around the world, including those that fuel Israel's genocide in Palestine and violent oppression across the world. The principal sponsor of Land Forces is the Victorian Labor government. In response to community opposition, Labor is mobilising 1,800 police. The mounted branch and the riot squad will be there to ensure that this weapons convention can continue to operate in heightened local and global circumstances. Land Forces creates an unacceptable risk to the safety, peace and social cohesion here in Victoria. Will the Premier be a leader for peace, step in now and cancel the Land Forces Expo?
Premier.
Thank you, Speaker. And I thank the member for Richmond for the opportunity to provide clarity and completely reject her characterisation of the Land Forces conference that is being hosted here in Victoria in conjunction with the Australian Army between the 11th and 13th of September. This is an international event that is where we will be hosting visitors from around the world who will be engaging in a number of meetings alongside a trade and investment presentation from those involved in the defence industry. Yes, it is a defence industry conference and it is an industry that is a legitimate industry and an industry that supports tens of thousands of jobs in our community. In the work that they do, we do support, as a government, we do support the defence industry in terms of the work they do in employing tens of thousands of hard-working Victorians. In terms of the reference that the Greens member has made regarding risks to safety and peace, the only risk that is presented to social cohesion in this state comes from those who want to use conflict overseas to drive conflict on the streets of Melbourne. Speaker, anyone who does this should and must be condemned. They should not have used the privilege of this place to stoke further fear and division. Right. What we should be doing, Speaker, as a united parliament is supporting those, whether they be from Israel or Palestine, whether they be from the Ukraine or Russia, whether they come from Sudan where there is horrific conflict in all parts of the world. We should be showing them love and support and care, not using that conflict that is happening, that is devastating families here. It is devastating families here, Speaker. And I would suggest to any member of parliament who wants to use events like this to stoke further division, fear, violence, because I can tell you what, Speaker, having attended the State Labor Conference where the member for Brunswick was standing with people behaving in a completely unacceptable way, we have to show leadership, Speaker. We have to show leadership on this critically important issue.
Member for Richmond on a supplementary question.
The Victorian government's responsibility should be first and foremost to this community, not to protect multinational weapons companies by bringing their war.
Member for Melbourne can leave the chamber for half an hour. I'd ask members on my right to cease interjecting and let the member for Richmond have her question. Member for Richmond.
The Victorian Government's responsibility should be first and foremost to protect this community, not the multinational weapons companies, by bringing their wars and their weapons to our peaceful city. Melbourne is a peaceful city, but the Minister for Police has threatened protesters, saying that every resource we can bring to bear will come down on top of you. Under the Victorian Charter of Human Rights, police must respect and protect the right to protest. They must not use force or other measures to limit or disperse peaceful protesters. By international human rights standards, disruption, civil disobedience and peaceful direct action are keystones of the right to protest and not considered violent in either practice or under the law. So, does the Premier support the right to peaceful protest?
Order. 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 Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
120. I'd ask you to consider, even if you took away and consider, the fact that it may be an opportunity for you to make a ruling on incitement. My view is that the words that the member are using are inciting and undermining social cohesion, and I think it would be clear to say that both sides of this chamber have that view, and I would ask you to consider making a ruling on that.
Order. I take on board what the Manager of Opposition Business has raised. It's not a point of order. However, I do ask the member for Richmond to address her questions to the chamber according to the standing orders in relation to being relevant, succinct and factual. Now, the Premier will respond.
Thank you, Speaker. In answer to the member for Richmond's question about do I support peaceful protests, of course I do. My question to the member for Richmond, does the member for Brunswick support peaceful protests? Or does he support protests that resulted in violence? Does the member for Richmond support peaceful protests, or does she support protests that bring more violence to the streets of our city? Does the member for Paran support peaceful protests, or does he support his colleagues? Does the member for Melbourne? And I say this, Speaker, because we will not be lectured by the Greens political party about peaceful
Member
protests.
for Richmond. Member for Richmond.
And I will not, Speaker, stand by and allow this sort of behaviour come to the floor of this parliament. This is the place for leadership, and on no more important an issue than social cohesion and ensure that violence overseas does not bring violence to our streets.